Hey guys, Languagehacker here. We've had a patch with a bunch of nerfs and a bunch of buffs. And after the patch is settled, the meta's, it hasn't been figured out yet, but the meta settled a little bit and we've seen a lot of some specific decks. But regardless of what those decks are, I've noticed myself, and I've heard a lot of other people saying stuff like this as well, a lot of the games that you lose just don't feel good. And personally, a lot of the games that I win also don't feel good. And even in general, when you lose games of Hearthstone, they don't really feel good, but particularly they feel yucky right now. And that's for a number of reasons that I'm going to get into in this video. So I'm going to talk to you about potential nerfs I'd like to be seeing, a couple of potential buffs as well that I think could have been implemented previously in the patch, because I don't think the buffs that they have implemented so far have been impactful enough. And the reason that I'm making a video like this is that I think it's a good idea to give you guys my thoughts on kind of the meta, what I think needs to be changed, but also because I believe Aleko here on Twitter said that there are going to be some standard balance adjustments soon. And they said that the next patch will likely be more nerf focused than the previous one and might include some neutral cards, which does give us a few hints at what that could entail. And interestingly enough, some of the neutral cards are going to be cards that I'm going to address in this video as well. So let's dive in and talk about the cards. Now, first up, Theotar. Theotar feels absolutely abysmal to play against. Just incredibly yucky to lose to. It's a disruptive card, and I do think disruptive cards are useful to have in Hearthstone, but contrary to a lot of other disruptive cards we've had, this actually lets you or your opponent pick cards to disrupt. It's a discover effect. Whereas cards in the past, for example, these are going to be some wild examples, Dirty Rats and Loatheb have not been specifically targeted as like discovers. They do have effects that are Loatheb is not random, but it targets spells, so that is a little bit different. And Dirty Rat does have disruption, but it's a bit more random. And I get that Theotar being discover driven gives you the feeling that you have more agency over that disruption, but I think that's a little too powerful because on the opposing side of this, I don't think anyone has ever been Theotar'd and felt good about it. It feels particularly bad. Dirty Rat, you could say, I could hold some minions in hand, play around a little bit, but Theotar, you just have a high chance to lose the game on the spot. And now this isn't necessarily, although I do believe Theotar is part of this problem, it's not necessarily Theotar's fault because of the power level we have in Hearthstone right now. There's a lot of cards that just kind of end games, like it's an entire deck's win condition. And examples of these are Sire Nathria, Magister Dawngrasp. In some cases, it can be something like a Guff. And the fact that there are these incredibly polarizing cards that Theotar can steal is one of the issues that I see. But if Hearthstone's, dev team isn't, or balance team or whatever, doesn't feel like it's important to change those big win cards, then I think they should at least try to rein in how bad this disruption feels. Because I think the idea of Theotar is great, but after playing it and against it, it feels really, it just feels yucky. And disruption is not supposed to feel good for the person getting disrupted, but it feels particularly bad to lose games just because your opponent discovers a specific card in your hand. So my proposed change to this is that it still costs 4 mana. The player who plays Theotar still discovers a card from their opponent's hand to take. However, the non-Theotar player at the start of their turn then gets to discover a card to put back in their hand. So this effect is similar to the Suspicious cards we have right now. Suspicious Alchemist that we see in Mage, Suspicious Usher and Priest, and I think Suspicious, I want to say Pirate in Warrior. And this way there is a bit more counterplay to Theotar. It's not just the one player choosing the disruption both ways. Here, I'm going to take your best card that I can see, and I'm going to give you the worst card that I could see. So you still have the option to disrupt with Nathrius, with Theotar by taking something like a Sire Nathrius, but at the same time, the opposing player does have a way to fight back, and it's not just as straightforward as, oh, I take your best card, the game kind of just ends from here. Yeah, this is a pretty drastic change to the card, but I think it still has the essence of the card at hand. It still fits the theme, but it feels a bit less bad. it is quite a drastic change, and I don't expect them to do that, but it's something I would like to see, because I still think this can end games. It's still good disruption, but it's not quite as, you know, feels bad. Okay, next up, Guff. Guff needs to die. Guff has been way too strong for way too long. It's absurd to me that this hasn't been changed yet. There are an incredibly high number of ways you can change this card. You can make it more expensive, which I don't think is good enough of a nerf. You can make it so that the battle cry doesn't give you a full mana crystal. You can change the hero power post Guff. I think the best way to change this is changing Guff's hero power to not give you a full mana crystal, but to give you an empty mana crystal once you use it. Part of the reason that Guff just spirals out of control is the fact that you can still use defensive tools and then ramp on the same turn, leading you to strong on stronger turns. But if you take away that full mana crystal and it becomes 2 mana, gain an empty mana crystal, you do actually pay a cost for this, or you pay more of a cost. Before, it's you pay 2 mana to get 1 mana back, but you get a permanent 1 mana going forward. This way you have to pay 2 mana for permanent mana going forward, which is, I think, a bit more taxing. And I think at that point you could still leave Guff at 5 mana. It still has that ramp feel to it, but it actually feels like there's more of a cost associated with that. And because of that, you actually have to decide, okay, wait, can I ramp here? Or, you know, do I have to take the whole turn to play Skill of Onyxia? Whereas before it's pretty obvious, I'm going to ramp and play Skill of Onyxia this turn. So I think this will keep it a bit more in check. Magister Dawngrasp, I think this card is also quite strong right now, and is one of those just win the game cards on the spot or over the course of a few turns, but because of the Magister hero power. I think I've seen a few other people propose a change where the hero power reads honorable kill, increase your hero power damage by 1. Currently it's increase your hero power's damage by 2, and I think reeling that scaling in a little bit will still have that same feel of inevitability, but it won't be quite as quick, and your opponent actually has a bit of time to build some sort of game plan against the Magister's Dawngrasp. I think the battle cry is still fine. I think just tweaking the hero power would bring this more in line with some of the other heroes. Edwin, this should be changed to 4 mana. Should have never been changed to 3 mana. Not much to say here. Edwin's kind of busted. Really doesn't need to be 3 mana. There's a lot of other stuff you can change in Rogue as well, but I think bringing back Edwin, this is one of those cards. In general, changing a card by 1 mana in Hearthstone is quite... It does have an effect, and in some cases it's not enough of an effect. I think in this case it will be enough of an effect, because the deck that Edwin is played in right now, that 1 mana difference is actually quite large. It gives the opponents an extra turn to prepare for a big Edwin, a big graveyard, in some cases an Edwin and a Necrolord Drake in the same turn, but it gives your opponent a little bit more time to set up to deal with a massive game-ending threat, and I think that's important. So 1 mana bump, I think, in this case, I joke about that a lot. Just bump it 1 mana. In this case, I think bumping it 1 mana is fine, and getting it back to 4 mana. And finally, Sire Nathria is a very powerful card, and the interactions with Bran, with Bolner, Kel'Thas, I think are a bit problematic, and you could consider changing Bran or Kel'Thas as well. I don't think changing Bran makes too much sense. I think Bran as is fine. I think Kel'Thas is a little strong, but still okay if it were used to be a bit more of a tempo play. For example, in Shaman, very often you'll have done something like Kel'Thas, 1/1 Piranha, and then an Insatiable Devourer, which isn't like a game-ending play, but it's a very big swing turn. And I think something like that makes sense, and I still think that should be something that's possible in the game. But I think the Nathria is a bit too strong in that case. Even when you don't have these supporting cards, it's just, it can be quite game-ending. And I understand that it's supposed to be a finisher, but I think it shouldn't be the game ends now. It should be, I now have an advantage because I played Sire Nathria, and you have to fight back against that. So because of that, I'd like to change Sire Nathria from Infuse 1 to upgrade the hero power. Not the hero power, sorry. Instead of infusing 1 to upgrade the battle cry, it should be infused 2 to upgrade the battle cry. So it still becomes this big sort of endgame threat, and it still can work with Bran and Kel'Thas if you'd like to, or Bolner. But you have to work a little bit harder to get that going. It's not quite as straightforward. And that will hit Shaman a little bit as well, because Shaman with the Nathria and Macaws and Bolners still have that synergy. But I think the Nathria does need to be tuned a little bit. Okay, So I've talked about nerfs. Buffs are a lot harder to talk about because it's a lot harder to understand what cards aren't performing well enough when those cards just aren't present in the meta at all. I do have a couple of suggestions here, but I do yield that this is a bit harder, and these are probably a little, not cop-outy, but probably a bit easier to kind of suggest. We'll start off with Warrior. So Warrior from the depths, you could argue this should have been nerfed a long time ago, and they did nerf it a long time ago, but I think that it was hit a bit too hard. Warrior in general was hit a lot when they changed from the depths, Shield Shatter, and Nelly several patches ago, and they have since reverted the change to Shield Shatter, which I think is good. It's positive because I think it was necessary. I just don't understand why they killed it in the first place, but that's another video. That being said, I still think it's not strong enough. My initial proposal for this, and I had this, I think, in another video as well, or if it was another video, I definitely thought about this before. But I think From the Depths should be changed to read, it's a 2-mana card, and it discounts the bottom 5 cards of your deck by 2 mana. So you still have a bit of a discount. It's not quite as influential as 3-mana discount 3, but it still has a discount effect, which gives Warrior a bit of mana cheat. And mana cheat can be kind of problematic, but I think this isn't enough to push an archetype quite as heavily into Charge Warrior as we had before. I think it might be a playable deck at this point, but I don't think it's going to be oppressive. And this does allow for a more control a game style, control a game plan, because I think the tools aren't just good enough to play by themselves right now, but with a bit of a mana bump from the depths, I think that could push Control Warrior into a playable area. Not a good area, mind you, but a playable area, because I think it's just kind of underrepresented. I think there has been some progress in people fine-tuning some Rage Warriors in the past week or two, so I'm not quite sure what to change in that, because I haven't had much experience with it myself, but I know for certain that Warrior does need a bit of a change, and I think From the Depths, more of a change than they have buffed it from the previous patch. I think From the Depths being changed to 2-mana discount by 2 is a way to accomplish that. Also Paladin. Let's talk about Paladin. So there's a bunch of cards you can change in Paladin, but I did see this on Twitter. I don't remember who suggested it, but if it was you, then thank you, because this made sense to me. So there's a card called Dunbaldar Bridge. It costs 4 mana. For the next 3 turns, after you summon a minion, give it +2/+2. It's a pretty good card. Payoff is nice, but I think it's a little too slow. And Paladin needs a bit of tempo. And this particularly can buff something like a pure Paladin. It can buff a tempo-oriented Paladin as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be pure. But I think changing this to 3 mana gives Paladin a bit more of a proactive board presence. This being a 3 mana instead of 4, it leads to curves like Dunbaldar Bridge into Stand Against Darkness, which is a card they did buff, but still doesn't see play even with a buff. I think this can lead into an aggressive sort of stance that Paladin can take. And honestly, even playing in a more of a non-traditional deck like a pure Paladin, where you have cut stuff like Wild Pyromancer and some other stuff, so you do have a bit less consistency in removal, but making up for that a little bit by buffing the tempo game plan of the Paladins. So I think this could be okay. Might be a bit too strong, but I think Paladin and Warrior are kind of in a rough enough spot that we need to try some stuff. And these would be kind of the changes I would wager could help that. I by no means am a developer, so these could be horrible ideas, but I think they're pretty solid. And I'm going to hopefully take a look at the balance adjustments that they announce whenever they announce it. Based on what was tweeted, should be within a week or two. So hopefully we can go check that out, see how on the marker I was with at least the cards that they changed. So even if I don't get the buffs or nerfs right, it would be interesting to see if I could actually at least guess the cards that they're willing to change. So hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Keep an eye out for deck guides and other discussion videos, and hope to see you on ladder.